Harrington Museum on Fifth Avenue does not open its brass doors for everyone. On this particular evening, it opens them for 200 people who believe they already know exactly who belongs inside. The lobby glitters, champagne, diamonds, a string quartet playing something no one's quite listening to, white roses in arrangements so large they have stopped being flowers and become architecture. 200 guests in evening clothes, moving through the light the way people move when they have never seriously considered the possibility that a room might not want them. To one table near the east wall, a place card, a name printed in clean serif letters, a chair that someone is supposed to be sitting in. Move closer, the chair is empty. Now look down, the marble floor, torn in half, a name split down the center. And a young woman in a simple black dress, on her knees, picking up the pieces, her hands are steady. Her face is calm. 200 phones are pointed at her. The circle around her is tightening. She does not hurry. She does not explain. She simply collects every fragment, one by one, with the composure of someone who knew before she walked through those brass doors tonight that this moment was always a possibility. Has been waiting very patiently for what comes next. She was on her knees on a marble floor, picking up pieces of paper. That's where this story begins, not with the morning. Not with the coffee going cold on the windowsill. Not with a father standing at a window, thinking about his daughter, walking into a room that would make its calculations before she finished crossing the threshold. With a young woman on her knees, in a room full of people filming her, hands moving carefully, deliberately, collecting every fragment of a torn invitation while 200 guests in evening clothes stood in a circle around her, phones raised, waiting for her to break. She didn't break, she just kept picking up the pieces. Remember that image, because everything that happens next grows from that single, quiet, devastating moment of choice. Go back to the morning of it, to a kitchen on the 31st floor of a building on the west side of Manhattan. The city doing what it always does at 6 in the morning, not quite awake but no longer sleeping, occupying that gray provisional hour when the day hasn't committed to anything yet. August Caldwell stood at the kitchen window with his coffee going cold, 58 years old, built like someone who had carried heavy things for a long time and had stopped noticing the weight. A face that trusted slowly, the kind that took weeks to arrive at a smile, but when it did, you felt like you had earned something. He wasn't looking at the city, he was looking at the photograph on the windowsill, Vivian, his wife, taken at a garden party in Connecticut 11 years ago. Laughing at something off-camera, teeth showing, eyes folding completely into the laugh the way they did when something ambushed her with genuine joy. Taken, that photograph, he remembered exactly what he had said to make her laugh like that. He was not going to share what it was because some things belong only to the people who were there. 6 years gone now, he still put fresh flowers next to that photograph every Monday morning. Not his ritual, not his performance. Just because he wasn't finished yet, he heard footsteps, light ones, the specific rhythm he would know anywhere. Naomi appeared in the kitchen doorway. 25 years old, simple black dress, hair pulled back with the ease of someone who has nothing to prove with her appearance and has known that for a long time. Small clutch under her arm, shoes chosen for the whole evening, not just the entrance. She looked, August thought, exactly like her mother on mornings when something important was waiting. Understated, present, finished. "You're up early," she said. Couldn't sleep. Not quite a lie. He had slept 4 hours, then lain awake thinking about the evening. The Caldwell Foundation's name on the Harrington Museum's program, about his daughter walking alone into a room where certain people would run their assessment in 3 seconds and spend the rest of the night being certain those 3 seconds were right. He didn't say any of that. He poured her a cup of coffee. She wrapped both hands around it, made the small, efficient inventory of someone who has a schedule and respects it. "Confirmed with Harrington's events coordinator yesterday," she said. "Our table is confirmed. They're announcing the foundation's contribution during opening remarks. Program director wants to say a few words about the Children's Arts Initiative. Good, Dad, I'll be fine. I know you will. You're doing the face. I don't have a face. You absolutely have a face. Mom called it your catastrophizing face. You look completely calm on the outside, but inside you've already run 17 scenarios and at least 4 of them end badly." August looked at her, said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Naomi almost smiled. She set her mug down, up her clutch, checked inside for the invitation, the Harrington's cardstock, heavy and white, the Caldwell Foundation name printed at the top in clean serif letters. "Everything in its place. I'll text you when I get there," she said. "Text me when you leave. Dad." Me when you leave, quiet, firm, a line drawn without drama. She pressed a kiss to his cheek, moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, that small backward pull, that hesitation before the world she had been doing since she was small. She would have worn exactly this dress, August said. He hadn't planned to say it. Naomi turned, held his eyes for a moment. No, she said. That's why I picked it. Then she was gone. August stood in the kitchen with cold coffee and a 31-floor view and the sound of the door closing behind his daughter. He looked at the photograph. He thought, be yourself. That has always been enough. He had never said those words to her directly. He was beginning to think he should have. The Harrington Museum sat on Fifth Avenue the way very old money sits, without apology, without explanation, as if the question of whether it belonged had been settled so long ago that raising it now would reveal only the ignorance of whoever asked. Limestone facade, arched windows that caught the last November light at the angle that made them look lit from within. Doors buffed to a shine that had nothing to do with functionality and everything to do with message. The message being, before you walk through us, understand what kind of night this is. Naomi's car pulled to the curb at 7:43. She stepped out, thanked the driver by name as just during the ride, and stood for one moment on the sidewalk looking up. She had been to 100 rooms like this one. In every single one, she had known, before she opened the door, that certain people inside would run their calculations the moment she appeared. Automatic, the 3-second assessment that determines before a word is spoken whether someone is read as belonging or as questioned. She had learned over the years not to wait for the verdict. She walked through the brass doors. The lobby was already warm with money and noise, and a dozen overlapping conversations happening at the dilated volume of people who want to be heard but not overheard. In white gloves moved through the crowd with champagne trays. A string quartet in the far corner played something that no one was quite listening to, but that everyone would notice if it stopped. White roses and calla lilies in a range so architectural they had ceased to be flowers and become declarations. Naomi took a glass of water from a passing tray. Her head clear, moved through the room toward the Caldwell Foundation table. She passed the service station near the east corridor, and she almost kept walking, but something made her slow. A woman behind the drinks table, 61 perhaps, silver threading through dark hair pulled back under a white staff cap. Hands moving over champagne flutes with a practiced, unhurried precision. The competence of someone's learned to make their work look effortless, because effortlessness is what these rooms require of people they do not see. The woman glanced up, met Naomi's eyes. Something moved between them. Not recognition exactly, something Sobaldor. The particular acknowledgement that passes between two people who both know what it is to be invisible in a room that isn't looking. Good evening, Naomi said. The woman paused. One beat. Good evening, miss, she said. Quiet, composed, and returned to her work. Naomi continued toward her table. She did not know the woman's name. She would learn it later, in a way she would not forget. The Whitmore family arrived like a system moving into position. Eleanor Whitmore entered first, 54 years old, and every year of it deployed with complete intention. Burgundy gown that had been chosen, fitted, and worn with the precise awareness of what it communicated. Diamonds at the throat. Hair arranged rather than styled. The face of a woman who had long ago stopped caring whether people liked her and had invested all of that energy into ensuring they noticed her. She moved through the room the way people move when they have never seriously considered the possibility that a space might not want them. Behind her, 57, silver at the temples, the expensive kind of tired in his eyes, handsome in the way of men who were devastating at 35 and have since made their peace with something more controlled. His phone was already in his hand before he'd fully cleared the entrance, eyes scanning, not for his wife or his children, but for the people he needed to find before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Because 9 o'clock tomorrow morning was, at this precise moment in the financial history of Whitmore Industries, the most important meeting Graham Whitmore had scheduled in 30 years of business. August Caldwell's office, $750 million on the table. Whitmore Industries needed that partnership the way a man underwater needs air, with the specific, urgent clarity of someone who can see the surface and is not sure they will reach it. 61 days of runway left before the numbers required a different kind of conversation, the kind that happened in lawyers' offices rather than boardrooms. Graham needed tomorrow's meeting to go perfectly. He had not, before entering the Harrington tonight, reviewed the foundation sponsor list. He would spend a great deal of time later thinking about that. Graham Beckett, 24 years old, the son Phone was already oriented at the particular angle, slightly below eye level, thumb hovering that signaled readiness. Rudeness, readiness. He had 1.1 million followers on TikTok. He had cultivated, with genuine intelligence, the persona of someone for whom rooms like this one were simply the background of ordinary life. Someone for whom the distance between his world and everyone else's was not a gap but a feature. Content behind Beckett Sloan. 22, clutch slightly larger than fashion strictly required because it contained a ring light that folded flat. 29,000 Instagram followers. Partnership negotiation currently in progress with a luxury skincare company that required her, contractually, to demonstrate consistent occupancy of exactly these spaces. The family arranged itself in the lobby with the ease of long practice. Naomi watched them from across the room for 30 seconds. She looked away, turned back toward the foundation table. There was a program director who wanted to discuss the Children's Arts Initiative, and Naomi was interested in that conversation. She did not see Eleanor Whitmore begin moving through the crowd. She heard her. "Excuse me." The voice had been trained over decades to land without appearing to try. Loud, simply unavoidable. The voice of someone who had never, in recent memory, been made to wait for attention. Naomi turned. Eleanor Whitmore stood close. The diamonds caught the light. Her eyes moved over Naomi in a single fast sweep. Dress, shoes, clutch, hair, and arrived at a conclusion. All of it in under 3 seconds, before a question, before a word from Naomi's direction. "I'm afraid there may have been some confusion," Eleanor said. The word confusion arrived like door locking, decided, final, not a question dressed as one. "I have an invitation," Naomi said. She opened her clutch, produced the card, held it out. Eleanor took it from Naomi's fingers, did not read it, checked the name, reached out and took it with the particular ease of someone who has never once questioned their right to handle whatever they choose. Tore it in half. The sound was precise, clean, the dry, definitive tier of heavy cardstock, a pocket of quiet that had opened around them without anyone orchestrating it. 2 halves fell, white, embossed, the Caldwell Foundation name divided down the center, both pieces settling on the marble floor without ceremony. Eleanor was already turning, already raising her voice to a carrying volume. "I think we should have security assist with this." Naomi looked at the pieces on the floor. Then she did something that no one in the room expected. She knelt down, slowly, with complete composure, as if the marble floor were a perfectly reasonable biggie, and the 200 guests now turning to watch were a perfectly reasonable audience. Gathered both the pieces, held them together in her palm, aligned them carefully, the Caldwell Foundation name reassembled across the seam. She stood, and her face was still, not frozen, not performing stillness, actually still in the way someone has been through enough versions of this particular moment that it no longer has the power to reach where the breaking happens. The circle formed fast. This is what crowds do, not because anyone decides, not because anyone leads, because spectacle has a gravitational field, and human beings move toward it before the thinking part of the brain can intervene. 200 guests in evening clothes drifted inward, closing the distance, phones emerging from clutches and jacket pockets with the reflexive speed of a generation that has learned to document first and process later. Whitmore had been recording for 40 seconds already. He moved through a crowd with the natural ease of someone who had long ago stopped distinguishing between living in a moment and producing content from it. Phone at chest height, thumb steady, voice pitched low and intimate as though he were sharing something private with the lens. "Guys, barely above a murmur. Guys, you need to see this. I don't even know where to start." 12,000 viewers. Growing. He panned to Naomi, standing in the center of the forming circle with torn paper in her palm. Then, back to his own face, eyebrows raised, doing the expression that performed incredulity for an audience that expected it. "This is okay. This is what peak delusion looks like when it collides with an actual exclusive event. She's standing there holding the pieces like that's going to change something." A short laugh, rehearsed and unrehearsed at the same time, like read the room, 22,000 viewers. Sloan had her phone up 30 seconds behind him. Instagram Live. Thumbnail text typed fast. "Girl, really thought she belonged here. That second embarrassment is actually killing me." Her 29,000 followers began arriving in the comment stream. 31,000. 34. Eleanor, reading the room's energy the way she had read rooms for 30 years, adjusted her register upward. "Ladies and gentlemen," not shouting, projecting. "The difference matters. I apologize for the interruption to what should be a lovely evening. Perky situations that requires attention." The murmur of the room quieted in rings from where she stood. 200 people turned, because that voice at that volume with that cadence was engineered to turn people. It worked. This young woman was attempting to attend tonight's event with what appears to be a fraudulent invitation. I think we can all agree that an occasion of this kind depends on Mrs. Moore. The interruption came from Naomi's left, not sharp, not raised, but carrying. Dr. Maya Osi stepped out of the circle. 48 years old, Ghana American, cardiothoracic surgeon at NYU Langone, which meant she made decisions in operating rooms in seconds that determined whether someone's father or daughter or husband went home. She had hands that had been inside human chests. She was not, as a baseline matter, impressed by diamonds and projection. She moved to stand beside Naomi. Just that. Took 4 steps and stood there, an act of such deliberate simplicity that it rearranged the geometry of the whole scene. Eleanor turned. Something in Maya's expression, level, unhurried, recording everything, introduced the first crack in Eleanor's certainty. Dr. Osi, Eleanor said. Careful now. Surely you understand the importance of maintaining. I understand, Maya said, that you tore a woman's invitation without reading it. Beat, too. I understand that this young woman has not raised her voice, has not disrupted anything, has done nothing except stand in a room you've decided she shouldn't be in. Her voice remained even. I'm curious what precisely that decision is based on. The silence that followed had texture. Peoples in the circle shifted. A woman near the back lowered her phone, then raised it again, unsure. A man in a tuxedo cleared his throat without meaning to. Crowd's easy collective agreement with Eleanor's performance developed its first visible hesitation. Eleanor's chins came up. Dr. Osi, your position as the hospital board is a separate matter from what's happening in this room, Maya said. Quietly, completely. She did not move. The threat landed and produced no result, and neither did Naomi. In the second row of the circle to the left, Judge Lorraine Voss had been standing still for 4 minutes. 66 years old, 30 years on the federal bench. Discrimination suits, civil rights cases, wrongful termination claims, housing cases, the full grinding catalog of American prejudice as it presents itself to the legal system. She knew what institutional bias looked like when it wore evening clothes. She had presided over enough of it to recognize the grammar. She did not take out her phone. She watched, building in the architecture of her own memory, a complete record of events, words spoken, physical positions, the spatial arrangement of who was standing where and what they did when. She had learned over 3 decades that what happens in moments like this one tends to matter later in ways that nobody currently in the room is thinking about. The far edge of the circle, half behind a column, a man named Everett Marsh had his right hand in his jacket pocket. 68 years old, retired 3 years ago after 4 decades as an investigative reporter for the Associated Press. His editor had told him at lunch 2 weeks that his miserable son was like the masses, someone who hadn't talked to another human being in months. Attended tonight's fundraiser to prove a point. He wasn't proving it anymore. He was standing very still, his fingers closed as round a small black moleskine notebook, the kind he had carried since 1989, and a pen uncapped in his other hand. To names, words, the exact phrasings Eleanor Whitmore was using, the spatial arrangement of the crowd, the angle of the phones. The moment Dr. Arnett appeared from the side corridor, tablet in hand, moving at a pace that was technically not running, but was everything running is except the name. He wrote the name Naomi when the security director said it, tentatively trying to get her attention. He wrote Caldwell, Dr. Arnett, Dr. Sylvia Arnett, the Harrington's director, whose face was doing 5 things simultaneously, and none of them were professional composure, stopped mid-corridor and grabbed the edge of a display table to steady herself. Everett looked at what he'd written, reached into his other jacket pocket, found a card with a phone number on it that hadn't changed in 20 years. Backward, away from the crowd toward the east corridor, dialed 2 rings. August, he said when the line connected. Everett, you need to come to the Harrington right now. Bring whoever you need. Don't call ahead. Meanwhile, 20 feet from his wife's performance, Graham Whitmore's phone had rung 11 times. Not answered it. The screen. August Caldwell, urgent. Graham had seen the guest list for tonight's event. Seen the Caldwell Foundation listed as platinum sponsor. He had seen the name Naomi Caldwell on the table assignment and thought, daughter of someone on the foundation board. A junior representative, not a principal, he had thought. Eleanor will sort it out, he had thought. I have 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Looked at the name on his screen, looked at Naomi standing in the circle with torn paper in her hand and her face unreadable. Looked at his wife, who was currently addressing 200 people and a combined streaming audience of 63,000 strangers with the confidence of someone's known who has not yet understood that she's building something that will fall on her. Graham pressed decline, put the phone in his pocket, told himself he would handle it in the morning. He would spend a long time later understanding that there are moments when choosing not to act is its own action. Pressing declines in a choice, that the morning is not always available. Eleanor was mid-sentence when Naomi moved, not toward the exit, toward security, not in any direction that would satisfy the story the circle had been built to tell. Naomi reached into her clutch, produced her phone, found a contact and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, a click connection. Dad. Her voice was the same as it had been all evening. Level, unhurried. The voice of someone reporting something factual to someone who will know how to receive it. I think you need to hear what's happening here tonight. Put the call on speaker. She held the phone to her ear and she looked at Eleanor Whitmore and she waited. The crowd's chatter, which had been running as a constant undercurrent beneath Eleanor's performance, stopped, not because anyone signaled it. 200 people simultaneously understood, without being told, that something had shifted. Eleanor's smile held, but it was working now. Visibly working. The smile of a woman who has deployed a weapon and is watching it produce an unexpected result and has not yet identified what the result is. Dr. Sylvia Arnett arrived from the side corridor. She had been in her office when her assistant reached her. She had covered the distance from her office to the main lobby in 3 minutes and 20 seconds, which was, for Dr. Arnett, a form of running. Her tablet was open. Her fingers were not entirely steady. She stopped at the edge of the circle. Naomi's face, then Eleanor's, then back to Naomi. Her mouth opened. The Caldwell Foundation, she said, to no one specifically. They are our platinum sponsor this evening, a $100,000 contribution, and this, she stopped. Her voice had lost its professional register. Found something rawer, this is Naomi Caldwell. Eleanor's smile didn't falter. Not yet. Foundation names can be. Caldwell. Dr. Arnett's voice dropped to something that was not quite public address. I am so deeply, but Naomi wasn't looking at her. Naomi was still on the phone. Dad, she said, same voice, same steadiness. I think you should know what the Whitmore family really thinks about our community. Tablet slipped from Dr. Arnett's hands. Not thrown, not dropped in anger or alarm. Simply released by fingers that had, in the space of a breath, lost their grip on the ordinary confidence that objects will stay where you put them. The marble floor. The sound was sharp, definitive, the crack of the screen spreading from corner to corner like a map of something that could not be put back together. The circle went quiet. 200 people, 67,000 streaming viewers, security staff who had been moving toward Naomi and were now not moving. A string quartet in the corner who had not been listening to any of this, but stopped playing anyway, as though the room's sudden silence had reached their music stands. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the center of all of it, and for the first time that evening, she was not managing the room. The room was managing itself. Beckett's count had reached 112,000 viewers. He was still recording. His voice, when he tried to continue his commentary, came out at the wrong pitch. High, too fast. The voice of someone who has understood something and is trying to decide whether understanding it helps. It did not help. He tried to end the stream, missed the button. Tried again. His hands, which had been perfectly steady for the past 20 minutes, had developed a tremor that made the small button difficult to find. 119,000 people watched him fumble. The comments were no longer mocking the woman in the black dress. Hold on, Caldwell, August Caldwell. Someone check. Oh no. Screen recording everything right now. Do not stop. They just publicly humiliated the Caldwell Foundation's daughter at the Caldwell Foundation-sponsored event. Sloane had better instincts. She had ended her Instagram Live 45 seconds earlier, the moment she'd seen Dr. Arnett's face. 45 seconds is a short time. 45 seconds of what her followers had already seen. Eleanor tearing the invitation, Beckett narrating, Naomi on the floor with both hands collecting the pieces was more than enough. She knew this. She pressed the button and the live stream ended and she stood with her phone face down against her thigh and watched her mother's performance arrive at its conclusion. Graham's phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not take it out. He looked at Naomi, standing in the circle. He looked at the cracked tablet on the floor. He looked at his wife, who was still smiling, but whose smile had become a thing she was maintaining alone now, without the room's support, the way you sometimes hold a door open, waiting for someone who isn't coming. And Graham Whitmore understood with the clear, cold, irreversible certainty of a man watching the ground give way that the 9 o'clock meeting was already over. Been over for some time, since exactly the moment he pressed decline. Naomi lowered her phone from her ear. She held the 2 pieces of her invitation in her open palm. She looked at Eleanor Whitmore. She did not speak. She simply waited, because there was nothing left that needed to be said from her direction. The room had heard enough. And the rest of it, all of it, was already on its way. August Caldwell walked through the brass doors at 8:17. Running, not storming, not performing any of the things a man is supposed to perform when his daughter calls, and her voice is that mixtured and that careful, and the words she chooses land like evidence rather than distress. Walked. Because August Caldwell had learned across 58 years of living in a country that had not always extended him the presumption of belonging that the most destabilizing thing you can do in a room that expects you to be loud is to arrive completely, devastatingly quiet. 2 people came with him. Renata Voss, his attorney, 44 years old, the kind of woman who maintained a mental folder for every contingency and could produce the relevant document before you finished explaining what you needed. She had been in the middle of dinner when August called. She had not complained, and Everett Marsh, who had been waiting in the east corridor for 11 minutes, notebook closed, pen capped, watching on the lobby from the corridor entrance, with the patience of someone who has spent 4 decades waiting for moments to arrive and has learned not to rush them toward him. The brass doors opened. The room turned, not because anyone announced August Caldwell, not because he said anything or did anything that asked for attention. Because of something that does not have a clean name, the way certain people occupy space, the particular quality of presence that arrives before the person does, that makes a room adjust its center of gravity without knowing why. 200 people turned, phones lowered, not put away, lowered. The difference is significant. August moved through the crowd in a straight line. To Naomi, no detours, no acknowledgments, no performance of the entrance. He walked to his daughter the way you walk to the one person in a room who matters, which is to say without any awareness that there are other people in the room. Stopped in front of her. Are you all right? I'm fine. He looked at her face. Read it with the precision of 25 years of paying attention to this specific face. He knew the difference between fine meaning genuinely fine and meaning I am holding the architecture of myself together through sheer will and would appreciate it if nobody tested the load-bearing walls right now. Was the second one. He put his hand on her shoulder. Once. The touch that says, I see you. I have you. Later. Then he turned and looked at Graham Whitmore. Graham had moved to the front of the crowd by then. The instinct of a man who has spent 3 decades believing that being in front of things was the same as controlling them. His right hand extended before August had fully turned. The handshake of someone who needs to establish immediately the register of business rather than confrontation. August wanted to explain. What do you know? August said. What the Caldwell Foundation funds. His hand stayed out. Question sat between them, calm, specific, completely reasonable in tone, and somehow more difficult to answer than any accusation Graham had prepared himself for, because it wasn't an accusation. It was a question, and the honest answer to it was not well enough, not carefully enough, not in the way you should know the business of the people you are asking to save your company. 4,000 children, August said. Arts programs, after-school studios, summer intensives across 5 boroughs, children who have no access to any of this. He did not gesture at the room. At something other than the room. At everything the room was a symbol of, unless some decides to build a door and prop it open. Paused, 1 beat. Most of those children look exactly like my daughter. The string quartet, which had resumed playing at reduced volume, became suddenly audible. Something in a minor key, unintentionally perfect, the sound of a room holding its breath and the music filling the space the breath left. Tonight, August continued, your family told every one of those children and every one of their parents precisely what you think of them. Not in private, not in a moment of confusion, in front of 200 people and however many thousands were watching online. Graham's hand came down, his mouth opened, closed. The vocabulary of damage control, which he had been assembling since the moment he'd understood what was happening, produced nothing useful. Damage control requires a frame, and the frame August had just built was not one that damage control could fit inside. August looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked at Renata. She opened her folder, and the financial reality arrived. Dramatically, not as punishment, as fact. Whitmore Industries' current debt position, quarterly loss figures, stock performance across the prior fiscal year. The specific number of days remaining before the company's situation required a different kind of conversation entirely. 61 days. Graham's color left him, the way Lutter leaves a room when the lights change, not all at once, but inevitably, and then completely. Those are private figures, he said. His voice had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with discretion. They are, August said, which makes it notable that I'm stating them here rather than in an office tomorrow morning. Pause, brief. That was not my preference, Graham. I want you to understand that. I came tonight because my daughter called me to do this. But here we are. He turned away, not theatrically, simply in the way of a man who has said what he came to say. Eleanor Whitmore was still standing 6 feet away. She had not moved since the tablet hit the floor. Her mouth opened. It's August, please. This is our company's, the partnership. Everything we've built, what you've built, August said without turning back, is not my responsibility to preserve. The silence after that was absolute. 119,000 people on Beckett's archived stream, 41,000 on Sloan's. Both feeds having long since been ended by their creators, both continuing to spread across 4 platforms through the mechanism of screen recording, and just the unilateral internet had perfected into something that could not be undone by a button press. The circle that had formed around Naomi had dissolved, in its place a different geometry, the room rearranged around August Caldwell and the Whitmore family, but differently. Not a circle of entertainment, something more uncomfortable, the arrangement of people who have just understood that they are witnesses rather than audience, and that those two things carry different responsibilities. Lorraine Voss stood near the east wall. She had her own phone out now, not to film, to make a note. One line, which she would later read aloud to a room of law students and watch their faces change. Prejudice doesn't announce itself. Tears an invitation and calls it a standard. She put her phone away, and she watched the Whitmore family stand in the wreckage of a single evening. Eleanor did not sleep. She lay on her side of the bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and did what she had been doing in difficult situations for 54 years. She built the narrative, the one that made the thing survivable, the one with load-bearing walls and a clear frame and a conclusion she could live inside. Been a misunderstanding. She had been protecting the event. She had not known who the girl was. That last sentence was the foundation of the whole structure. I did not know who she was. Deployed correctly, to the right people in the right register, that sentence had the structural capacity to contain significant damage. It was the sentence of someone who had made an error of information, rather than character. Those were different things. Distinction mattered. She reached for her phone. Began composing, "Dear Miss Caldwell, I am writing to express my sincere regret regarding the confusion that occurred this evening. It was never my intention to cause offense, and had I known," she stopped. Read those 4 words back. Known. She set the phone face down on the nightstand, stared at the ceiling. The problem was not the sentence. The problem was what it meant when you followed it honestly. Had I known you were important enough, I would have treated you differently. Which was true, which was not an apology, which was, in fact, the precise continuation of the logic that had produced the evening's events. Had I known you mattered was not a correction. It was a confession. She got up at 2:30, went to her writing desk, opened her laptop, wrote a longer version, more careful, with section breaks and context and several paragraphs she was, in the strange clarity of that hour, genuinely proud of. Explained the institutional pressure she'd felt, the event's standards, the way things had moved faster than she'd intended. She read it back at 4 in the morning. Understood, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been working very hard in the wrong direction, that every word was still about her. She closed the laptop. She did not throw the letter away. She printed it, folded it once, and put it in the inside pocket of the jacket she had been wearing. She put the jacket in her wardrobe, and she left the letter inside it, because she understood, sometime in those dark early hours, that she was not done with it yet. It would need to be accounted for before she could be finished with it. She did not yet know how or when. But she knew the letter needed a different ending than the one she had written. She went back to bed. Lay in the dark. The ceiling offered nothing. Across the apartment, Hiccups' study light was still on. She could see it under the door. She should go talk to him. She did not go. At 5:43, she heard him in the kitchen. She found him at the counter with his phone face down in front of him, her coffee untouched, looking at nothing in particular. She had seen that expression before, not often, the expression of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of something and is not yet ready to speak about them. She poured herself coffee. "How bad is it?" she said. Graham looked at her. He had known in broad shape that Whitmore Industries was in a difficult position. He had known the general parameters of their debt load, their stock performance, the runway they were working with. What he had not known, what the phone call with his attorney at 6 in the morning had made precise and specific and unavoidable, was the full scope of the leak exposure, the exact mechanisms by which the Caldwell partnership could be withdrawn, and the downstream consequences to the company's lenders if that withdrawal occurred. In the sheet of the room, he had not known until the attorney laid it out in detail how little space there was to move inside it. "You may have ended everything," he said. "Not with the managed volume of 28 years of careful marital disagreement. With the directness of a man who has run out of capacity for management. Embarrassed us, not created a complication, ended it. The company, the partnership, the jobs of 4,000 people who had nothing to do with last night." Eleanor's jaw was set. "I was protecting whose standards?" He looked at her directly. 34 years he had known this woman. He could not remember the last time he had looked at her without the smoothing, without the management. "I need you to tell me whose standards those actually are. Because I have been in business for 30 years, and the standard you were enforcing last night has been costing us more than we ever measured, in ways we were choosing not to look at." Eleanor did not reach for the counter-argument, which was different. With it, actually sat with it, in a way he could see on her face, something undefended, something that had not had a name for her yet and was beginning to find one. Was in the hallway. He had come downstairs for water and had stopped outside the kitchen door and had not moved since. 6 minutes, the full length of both voices, his back against the hallway wall, glass in hand, listening to his parents have the first real conversation he had heard between them in years. He was 24 years old, and he had spent 24 years watching his father defer and smooth and absorb the consequences of things he himself had not done. Watching him choose the path of least structural damage, watching him decline, he had not, until this morning, understood what that pattern had cost. Back upstairs, he did not drink the water. He sat on the edge of his bed and opened his phone and found the archived stream and watched it. Voice, his own face doing the thing it had been trained to do, making someone else's distress into content, into numbers, into evidence of his own relevance. Watched it twice. The second time he watched his own face, and the face was recognizable and foreign at the same time. Young in a way he was no longer sure he wanted to be. He put the phone face down on the mattress. Not delayed it yet, but he sat in the morning quiet and he thought about what Everett Marsh had said in the lobby the night before, quiet enough that only the people immediately nearby had heard it. The most powerful person in that room was the one who refused to perform either her pain or her power. Had heard it standing 3 feet away. He was thinking about it now. He was going to keep thinking about it for a long time. 11 people overnight, not organized, not coordinated, not the product of anyone's plan. Jerome Field posted, first, 38 years old. 6 years in logistics at Whitmore Industries, an internal complaint about discriminatory treatment, a termination letter 4 months later citing restructuring. Beckett's arc stream and wrote 7 sentences beneath it. No inflammatory language, no names called. A clear, specific account of what 6 years something had looked like from the inside. The last sentence. Tonight, watching that video, I understood that what happened to me was not an accident. It was a pattern. Just never had this many cameras. By midnight, 3 more people had shipped similar accounts. By 2 in the morning, 11. Not known each other, most of them. Had not planned, had simply seen the same video at the same hour, and found the comment sections and reshares and the particular geography of the internet after midnight that they were not alone in the specific thing they had carried. The feeling of that discovery was not simple, was not clean, was not the uncomplicated relief that a cleaner narrative would assign to it. Complicated and raw and real, which is why it spread. Graham read the posts at 5:45 that morning before Eleanor came downstairs, and sat with Offen on the counter looking at nothing for a long time. He called his attorney, not the firm that managed the partnership negotiations. His personal attorney, the one who had handled the Whitmore family's affairs for 22 years and who, he would tell him the truth without softening it. I need the full picture, Graham said, not the optimistic version, his attorney told him. Graham listened, set the phone down. looked at the kitchen, at the apartment, at the view from the window that was in its uninterrupted scope, a specific of luxury he had stopped noticing years ago. I pressed decline. If that, I stood 20 feet away and I pressed decline. Not because he hadn't known something was wrong. Known, not the full scope of it, not who Naomi Caldwell was, not the magnitude of what Eleanor was building, but enough to have stepped forward, enough to have said, wait. He had not said wait. He had put the phone in his pocket. And now he was in his kitchen reading the accounts of 11 people he had employed and not seen, and he could not find a version of events that placed him on the right side of any of it. Sloane's moment came 11 days later, not in a room or a confrontation, in a direct message. She had ended her Instagram live the moment she'd understood what was happening in the Harrington lobby. Posted since, was moving through her days with a particular careful quiet, not knowing yet what came next, not forcing the question. The message arrived from an account she recognized, a follower she had interacted with dozens of times over 3 years, someone who had commented on her content with consistent enthusiasm. 7 words. I used to think you were aspirational. And then on the next line, now I just feel sorry for you. Sloane, read it. Read it again. Read it 17 times in the space of 10 minutes, which she only understood later, sitting with her therapist in December, was not because the message was cruel. She had received crueler things, but because it was accurate. Because the person who sent it had watched her perform aspirational living for 3 years and had seen in 45 minutes of Instagram Live exactly what that performance was built on. With her phone in her lap for a long time, then she opened her laptop. She did not write a response. She did not write a post. She opened a blank document and she wrote it in plain language with no audience and no framing, the most honest account she could manage of what she had been doing and why and what it had cost the people it had cost. She wrote for 2 hours. She did not publish any of it. She saved it. She went back to it in November and in December and in January. She still had not published it, but she came back to it because it was the truest thing she had written in years, and she needed to know it existed. It was the beginning. Month 1 was Eleanor and the training. She declined it, not loudly, not with a confrontation. Particular polished resistance of someone who has been declining things for decades in ways that sound like practicality. A workshop is not going to, then do the full program, Graham said. Graham, this is performative. It's theater designed to. It's a condition, he said, of the agreement we asked for, that Naomi Caldwell was generous enough to propose instead of simply ending the partnership and leaving us with 61 days and no options. Eleanor went quiet. She looked at the list of conditions Renata Voss had sent over on behalf of the Caldwell Foundation. She had read it 4 times. Each time she arrived at the bias training requirement, she felt something that she would have described to herself as unfair. Something that felt like being required to perform repentance, rather than being trusted to change on her own terms. She did not yet understand that change on her own terms was exactly the problem. Her own terms were the thing that needed to change. She signed the agreement. She attended the first session. She sat in the back row with her arms crossed in a posture that was not quite open rebellion but was not cooperation either. 2 was the shareholders, 14 of them, the kind who had been on the Whitmore Industries board long enough that they had stopped distinguishing between the company's values and their own comfort. They held a meeting in someone's private club, leather chairs, no minutes taken, the kind of meeting that happens when people want to say things without having said them. The result arrived as a letter, signed by 9 of 14, expressing grave concern about the proposed diversity initiative and its potential to disrupt company culture and operational performance. Graham read the phrases company culture and operational performance, and he knew, with the fluency of a man who had spent 30 years inside these rooms and these conversations, precisely what each phrase was a container for. Called Renata Voss. Tell the Caldwell Foundation's offices, he said, that I'm ready to begin the full audit, starting with the board composition. A pause. The board specifically, Renata said. Even, professional, not quite neutral. Start there, Graham said. That's where the culture is set. He hung up, sat in his office for a while. He thought about the 9 signatures on the letter. About Graham Whitmore of 5 years ago, who would have called each of those 9 men back and managed their concerns and found a middle path that preserved the relationship and diluted the initiative and called that leadership. He did not make those calls. Month 3 was Beckett and the silence. He had deleted his social media accounts on the 8th day after the Harrington. deactivated, deleted. The distinction mattered to him in a way he didn't fully understand but honored anyway. His friends, the ones who had constituted his social world since boarding school, since the specific geography of privilege that pass itself off as simply the way things are, did not drop him dramatically. Confrontation, no scene, they simply slowed. Text returned a day later than usual. Invitations that used to be automatic stopped being automatic. The group chat he had been in since sophomore year of college went from daily to weekly to, eventually, something that pinged occasionally with content he was no longer being tagged in. With that, he sat his apartment for 3 weeks, largely alone. No content, no performance, no cultivated persona to maintain. Just himself, which turned out to be a stranger he needed to spend some time with. He watched the archived stream 4 more times. Not for punishment, because he felt, with the stubborn conviction of someone who is genuinely trying to understand something, that it had not finished telling him what it was there to tell him. On the 21st day, he turned his phone back on and called the diversity consultant the Caldwell Foundation had recommended. A woman named Dr. Patricia Odom, who worked specifically with young people from backgrounds of significant privilege and had over 15 years developed a particular gift for not letting them make their growth comfortable. She answered on the second ring. He said, "I want to do this right. I don't know yet what right looks like." "I want it," she said. That's where it starts. It was not a warm conversation. She asked him questions he did not have adequate answers to. She told him that was fine, that the absence of adequate answers was the accurate starting place, and that she should come back next week and they would begin from there. Back next week and the week after. Month 4 was the grocery store. Eleanor was alone, still unusual for her. She had been moving through her days since the Harrington with a particular carefulness, attending the required training sessions, meeting with Graham's consultant, participating in the conversations that the conditions required. Doing them the way you do things when you are still, somewhere underneath the compliance, waiting for the pressure to release. Waiting for enough boxes to be checked that life could return to the shape it used to have. She was in the Sudu section of a market on the Upper East Side on a Wednesday afternoon. She turned around, and there was a woman, 61 years old perhaps, silver threading through dark hair, practical coat, a cart with careful choices. Face of someone who has navigated their days with competence and without complaint in spaces that have not often stopped to look at them. Eleanor's brain processed the face, returned nothing, no name, no context, no recognition at all, and then the woman looked up. Her face, when it found Eleanor's, registered recognition immediately, completely, without uncertainty. "Mrs. Whitmore," the woman said. Eleanor looked at her. She knew she should know this face. She could feel the shape of something that should be there, but wasn't. Particular cognitive discomfort of a gap where information should live. "Dora," she said, half statement, half guess. A name that had been in the conditions document in a different context, in a sentence she had read 4 times without fully landing on. Dora Reyes, who had worked in the Whitmore home for 12 years, who had known the children's schedules and Graham's coffee preferences, and the specific drawer in the kitchen, where Eleanor always put her reading glasses and always failed to find them. Who had been present, quiet and efficient and entirely invisible in the background of every ordinary weekday of Eleanor's domestic life for 12 years. Who Eleanor's brain had not recognized in a grocery store, in full light, at 61 years old with the same face she had worn for 12 years of Tuesday mornings in Eleanor Whitmore's kitchen. Dora looked at her for a moment. Then she said simply, without anger and without performance, "That's all right, Mrs. Whitmore. Didn't expect you to." She pushed her cart down the aisle. Eleanor stood in the produce section. She did not move for 4 minutes. Teenage stock clerk had to ask her, apologetically, to step aside so he could access the bin she was blocking. She stepped aside. She completed her shopping. She went home. She sat at her writing desk. And she opened her laptop and she found the letter she had written at 4 in the morning 2 weeks after the Harrington. The long one, the careful one, the one with the section breaks and the enumerated context and all the paragraphs she had been proud of. Read it through once. Then she opened a new document. She wrote one name at the top, Dora Reyes. And she began again, from a different place, smaller, less defended, without the section breaks and the enumerated context, without any of the architecture she had built to make the thing about herself. Wrote for 4 minutes. Then she stopped. Then she made a phone call that she had not made before. She called the Harrington Museum's events office and asked for the contact information of the staff agency that had provided the servers for the November fundraiser. 3 calls and 2 days to find a number for Dora Reyes. See, when she called it, Dora let it ring 4 times before answering. Eleanor said, "I'd like to ask you something. Not to apologize. Again, I've done that. I want to ask you if you would be willing to come to something. In January, at the Harrington. And I want to explain why I'm asking before you decide." Dora was quiet for a moment. "Tell me why," she said. Eleanor told her. Dora said, "I'll think about it." She called back 2 days later. She said yes. Naomi kept the anonymous message. She'd received 4,000 messages in the weeks following the Harrington. Most of them kind, many of them angry on her behalf. A meaningful number from people who wanted her to feel that she had won something, that justice had been served, that the story had reached its correct conclusion. She read them all, and then there were the others. Not many, maybe 30, but present and specific, and this was the part that kept her up, not wrong. Justice because your father has money. Must be nice to have a billionaire pick up the phone. I've had invitations torn up. Been asked to leave rooms. Nobody of us father walked through the door for me. She did not show these to August. She printed the first one, taped it to the upper corner of her desk, lived with it where she could see it every time she sat down to work. The person who sent it was telling the truth. That was what made it hard to sleep. Not the cruelty. She had received genuinely cruel messages, and they had bounced off something solid in her. This was different. This was accurate. She had stood in that circle, and her father had come through the door, and the room had changed. And the reason it had changed was not at its foundation, about her or her hearth or the rightness of the situation. August Caldwell's net worth and his name, and the weight those things carried in a room full of people who understood net worth and names. The young woman who did not have that phone call, who went home alone with the torn pieces, with no Everett Marsh in the East Corridor, no second chapter, no summits planned for January. That woman was not hypothetical. She was in Naomi's inbox. 11 of the 30 messages were from her. Different names, different cities, same basic architecture of ears. Naomi sat at her desk, looked at the taped message, opened a document, and began to write. Not a statement. Post. Something she did not yet have a shape for, starting with a question she did not know how to answer, but refused to stop asking. What happens to the woman who doesn't have the phone call that changes the room? She wrote for 4 hours the first night, came back the next morning and the morning after. She was still working on it in December. Still revising it in early January. She brought it to August one Sunday afternoon, and he read it in the kitchens without saying anything for a long time. He looked up and said, "This is the most important thing you've ever written." She said, "I know. Not done with it yet." He handed it back. She kept working, because this was the thing she had figured out in the weeks since the Harrington about the difference between justice and change. Justice had happened in one night, in a room with cameras, with a very specific set of circumstances that existed because of who her father was and what his name meant to the people in that room. Change was something else. Change was slower and less photogenic and did not have a moment when the tablet hit the floor and the room went silent. Change was the taped message. Change was the 11 women in her inbox. Change was the question she did not yet know how to answer, but was going to keep asking until she did. She cleared her schedule for the 3rd week of January. She had a speech to finish. The brass doors opened at 6 in the evening. Same doors, same limestone, same Fifth Avenue address that had been making its statement for 90 years without revision or apology. The flowers had changed. Spare white amaryllis in tall vessels, now bare branches, the aesthetic of a room that had stopped pretending that difficulty wasn't happening, and found in that honesty something cleaner than comfort. Different room, though. Not in anything a photograph would catch. Different in the quality of attention inside it. In the particular way 300 people had arranged themselves, not because the occasion required their presence, and their presence was currency, but because they had chosen to come. For a reason they understood before they walked through the door. Corporate directors and diversity consultants and legal scholars and civil rights advocates. Contingent of HBCU students who had received invitations 3 weeks prior with a handwritten note from Naomi explaining what the evening was for and why she wanted them in the room specifically. As symbols, as participants, museum staff with name badges and assigned seats at tables in the main hall, not trays. Service stations, seats. Dr. Sylvia Arnett had made that call herself 8 weeks prior, after a 2-hour conversation with Naomi that had left her with 4 pages of notes and a specific reckoning with the distance between what the Harrington had been on one November evening and what it could choose to become. The Whitmore family occupied the front row, Eleanor in navy. Small pearl earrings she had owned since her 20s, the only jewelry she'd put on. Her hands in her lap around a notebook, hard cover, lined pages, because she had spent 8 months practicing the discipline of writing down what other people said before composing her response to it. Still uncomfortable, still practicing, Graham beside her, 8 months visible in his face in the way honest difficulty becomes visible, not as damage exactly, but as weight that has been carried rather than moved around. No phone on the table, hands folded, a decision renewed each morning the way you renew any commitment that pulls against a habit formed over years. Sloan, sitting beside a young woman named Amara, a pre-law student at Howard, met at a bias training workshop 6 weeks prior. They had exchanged numbers that afternoon and had been talking since in the way of two people who have genuinely surprised each other. At the end of the front row, one empty chair, a small handwritten card on the seat, reserved, Dora Reyes. Naomi saw it from across the room. She was standing near the east corridor, the same corridor where Everett Marsh had stepped from a crowd 8 months ago to make a phone call that changed what happened next. She had been standing there for 10 minutes, not avoiding the room, taking one breath before walking into it. The way you stand at a door sometimes and let yourself understand what's on the other side before you open it. To the two halves of her torn invitation in her jacket pocket, she had been carrying them since that night. August found her without being told where she was. He stood beside her without asking why she was in a corridor instead of with the guests. Known her long enough to know she needed the edges of rooms sometimes, the places slightly outside the center, where you could hold the whole shape of a thing before stepping into it. "How are you?" "Ready," she said. Then, after a moment, scared. "Of what?" She thought about it honestly. "It won't be enough," she said, "that we'll say the right things tonight and go home, and in 6 months it becomes a story people tell about a time something almost changed." August was quiet. "That's possible," he said, not reassurance, the truth, because she had asked Faults for the truth and he had always known the difference between those two things and had never confused them on her behalf. "The other possibility," he said, "is also possible." She nodded. One more minute in the corridor, the sounds of the filling room read reaching them from the main hall. She straightened her jacket, checked her pocket, and walked toward the light. Dr. Arnett opened without ceremony. 8 months ago, this museum failed in its responsibility to a guest and to its own stated values. I was the director then. I am the director now, and I did not respond with the integrity my position required. She paused. "I want to say that first before anything else, because nothing that follows tonight can be honest if I'm not. No applause, attention, the real kind, where people lean slightly forward without noticing. We are not here to celebrate surviving a failure. We are here to account for what has been built since, and to be honest, which is harder, about how far there is still to go." Graham Whitmore stood next. He had asked for a smaller role, had told the organizers the family should not be centered in an evening that wasn't about them. The organizers, after speaking with Naomi, had said, speak about other people. He started with Marcus Johnson, 34. Logistics supervisor at Whitmore Industries for 7 years. Applied 3 times for regional management across 4 years. Passed over 3 times. Each performance review across those years cited exemplary work, no areas for improvement. Marcus was not passed over because anyone in our process would have described themselves as biased, Graham said. Passed over because the process was not designed to see him. Systems don't require bad intentions to produce unjust outcomes. They require only inertia, the assumption that the way things have been is the way things should continue. Next photograph. Marcus Johnson, present day, Regional Operations Director, Northeast Division, if efficiency improvement in his first 4 months. 2 process changes since adopted company-wide. I want to be precise about what this means, Graham said. Marcus had those ideas the entire time he was being passed over. We simply were not built to receive them. The cost of that was not abstract, it had a number. And the number matters less than what it represents, which is years of potential that we chose, through inertia and assumption, not to access. He continued, Maria Santos, Dr. Patricia Brooks, Jerome Whitfield, who was in the 4th row tonight, not because Graham had invited him, but because Naomi had. Each name without rushing, he sat down. The room stayed quiet, not from awkwardness, because the quiet was the honest response. Applause would have been a way of moving the discomfort outward. The discomfort needed to stay. Beckett stood. The room changed texture the moment he rose. Because his presence at a podium 8 months after the archived stream had reached 2.8 million views carried its own weight. The reasonable, earned skepticism of 300 people who had watched someone perform for an audience and were now watching him perform for 300 and were waiting with their eyes to see whether performance was still the point. He didn't open with an apology. 2.8 million people watched me narrate a young woman's humiliation, he said. I was good at it. That is the thing I spent 8 months sitting with, not the shame of being caught doing it. The question of how I became someone for whom it came naturally, who found it unremarkable. He looked at his hands. Because the things that feel like nothing are the most accurate map of what we've been taught to value, he continued. Bringing the specific education of being in rooms that were yours by inheritance and learning through that inheritance, not to see the people in those rooms who were there despite something rather than because of it. Not here to tell you I've fixed it. I'm here to tell you I've started. And starting required me to first understand what I had been unable to see before I could begin to learn how to see it. Down. The applause this time was real, not reflexive. The response of people who have heard something delivered without the scaffolding of self-congratulation and recognize what that costs. Eleanor stood last among the family. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced an envelope, white, her handwriting on the front. She set it on the podium. After the Harrington, I wrote a letter to Naomi Caldwell. Same night, 2 a.m. Several pages, carefully constructed. She looked at it. I want to read one line. She opened the envelope. Found the page. The line in red. I wrote, had I known who you were, this evening would have been very different. She put the page down. I kept that letter for 6 weeks, returning to it, trying to find the ending that completed it. Every time I arrived at that sentence, had I known who you were, and the longer I sat with it, the more precisely I understood that the sentence was not an apology. It was a restatement of the original problem. She straightened. It was me telling Naomi Caldwell that I would have treated her with basic human dignity if I had first established that she was important enough to deserve it. Which is exactly what I had decided in 3 seconds, that she was not. She picked up the envelope, tore it in half. The sound was sharp and clean, and everyone who had seen the stream recognized it. Same sound. Same building, 8 months between them. Several people flinched. I am not doing this to be dramatic, Eleanor said. The room released something. Brief, genuine, surprised. The acknowledgement of someone demonstrating self-awareness about their own capacity for theater. The most human thing Eleanor Whitmore had produced in public in a very long time. I am doing it because I spent 6 weeks making that letter into something it could never be, and when I finally understood why, I stopped writing. I started doing something harder than writing a good letter. A pause. I want to say a name. She looked at the end of the front row, where the chair was no longer empty. Dora Reyes had arrived 15 minutes into the program, slipped in quietly, and taken her seat without announcement. 61 years old, silver-threaded hair and worn loose tonight. A deep blue dress bought for the occasion, but she had decided, when she called Eleanor back in November to say yes, that if she was going to sit in the front row of a room like this one, she would sit in it fully. With apology, Eleanor held Dora's gaze directly. Dora Reyes worked in my home for 12 years. She knew my children's route. She knew how my husband takes his coffee and which drawer I keep my reading assemblies in and lose them in every single week. She was present in my home more days of the year than most people I would have called close. She stopped. The next sentence find its own pace. I did not recognize her face in a grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon. In full light, after 12 years. The room absorbed this. I am saying Dora's name tonight because she deserves to have it said. This room, by me, out loud. Not because naming repairs what was not done. It does not repair it. Because the smallest possible beginning of actually seeing a person is knowing their name. Not because they serve a function. Not because they are connected to someone powerful, because they exist, because the name belongs to them and has always belonged to them, regardless of whether anyone in any room has bothered to learn it. Back, the applause came. Not unanimous, there were people still working through complicated feelings about Eleanor Whitmore and what she deserved at a podium. Those feelings were legitimate and did not need resolving tonight. But the applause was real. Dora sat in the front row and received it with an expression that gave very little away. She had not come for applause. She had come because Eleanor had asked her to be in the room when her name was said. So that it was real, so that it was for Dora, not about her. Whether those were the same thing was something Dora was still deciding. Naomi walked to the podium last. She had been in the second row, not the front. The front was for the people who needed it tonight. She had the invitation pieces in her pocket, and she left them there. She did not open with November, did not give the rooms a story it had been assembling for 2 hours, and was waiting to hear confirmed and completed. Shape, resolution, arrival at the correct conclusion was one she had been thinking about carefully for 8 months, and she had decided it was the wrong shape for what this evening actually was. Opened with a message. After that evening in November, she said, I received a message, anonymous, 11:52 p. 7 words. She looked at the room. You got justice because your father has money. Silence. That person was not wrong. The room shifted, not with discomfort exactly, with the sensation of a narrative being quietly taken apart by the person who was supposed to be standing at its center. I stood in this building 8 months ago. My father walked through those doors, and the room changed. And the reason the room changed was not because the truth of my dignity was so undeniable it could not be suppressed. It was because August Caldwell has a name that carries weight in rooms like this one. Money behind the name. Partnership on the table. Those are the reasons, not me, not anything I said or did or was. She let that sit in the room. There is a young woman who does not that phone call, who has been asked to leave spaces, had her presence questioned, been told in explicit and inexplicit ways on ordinary days in ordinary places that she does not belong, and when it happened to her, she went home. No August Caldwell at the door, no front row seat with her name on a card, no January summit. She looks at the 300 people in front of her. Not hypothetical. She is in this city tonight, and she doesn't know about this room. But she is watching the world the way she has always watched it, to see whether the things said in rooms like this one are the things that actually happen afterward. Her voice stayed level. It cost her. You could see it, if you were paying attention, not in her face, but in her hands on the sides of the podium. Dying, not gripping. The distinction mattered. Everything built in the past 8 months, the audit, the changed processes, the scholarship fund. This evening, none of it is for me. I did not need it for me. The night at the Harrington resolved in my favor before any of this existed. She held the room's eyes. This is for her, the one who went home alone. She is the only measure that matters. The numbers, not the companies that have adopted new protocols. Her, specifically, whether she is safer in a room tonight than she was 8 months ago. I don't know the answer to that question. I think the honest answer is, I don't know. I think we have built something real in the past 8 months, and I think it is not enough, and I think both of those things are true at the same time. The work, not this evening, but the mornings that follow this evening, is to hold both of them and keep going anyway. She reached into her jacket pocket, took out the 2 halves of the torn invitation, held them together in her palm. Caldwell Foundation name reassembled across the seam. She had carried these through 8 months of the work, through the sessions and the arguments and the drafts and the sleepless nights and the 11 messages she'd printed and kept on her desk. She looked at them, then looked up. Be honest about the calculation. The 3-second one, the one that runs before a word is spoken. Question it, not once at a workshop, every time, especially when you're tired, especially when questioning costs something, especially when no one is watching. Put the invitation pieces back in her pocket, stepped away from the podium, sat down. The room held its silence for 5 full seconds. 5 seconds of silence in a room of 300 people is not comfortable. It is the opposite of comfortable. It is the sound of people choosing, together, not to fill a space with the thing that would make the space more manageable. They held it. Then the response came. Not applause as release. The acknowledgement of people who have heard something true and understand, however imperfectly, what that truth is asking of them. The formal evening ended at 9:42. People stayed. Beckett found Jerome Whitfield near the back wall with a plate of food beside him, untouched. Stopped in front of him. Neither of them said anything for a moment longer than comfortable. I owe you a specific apology, Beckett said. A general one. Jerome looked at him. Yeah, he said, you do. I know I can't. No, Jerome said. But you can do what you said you're doing, and you have to do it longer than it feels like you need to. Because it's going to feel like enough before it actually is. Beckett nodded. How do you know when it is? Jerome thought about this with the seriousness the question deserved. I don't think you get to know, he said. I think you just keep going and you don't use the not knowing as a reason to stop. They stayed in conversation for 50 minutes. Did not take out his phone. He listened to Jerome describe 6 years at Whitmore Industries. Specific texture of being in a place that was technically open to you and structurally arranged against you, and the way you learned, over time, to carry that without showing it, because showing it the place less tenable and you needed the place. calculus of that, the daily cost of it. Beckett listened without crossing to his own experience. He had been practicing that discipline for months. It was still difficult, but it was beginning to feel like something other than deprivation, beginning to feel occasionally like the more interesting option. Afterward, he opened his notes application and wrote down 3 things Jerome had said that he did not want to lose. Specific sentences, the kind that carry something you need to keep. He put the phone away. Across the room, Sloan was still in conversation with Amara and HBU students, Destiny, pre-med, and Raphael, computer science, and the conversation had long since departed from the occasion that had produced it and become something with its own energy. The kind of conversation that happens when people discover they are more interested in each other than in the event that brought them together. Sloan was listening more than she was speaking. She was aware of this and found it genuinely preferable, not as discipline. Discovery. The discovery that other people's accounts of their own lives were more interesting than her narration of her own, and that this should perhaps have been obvious earlier. Dr. Maya Osi found Naomi near the east window. You did the harder thing at the podium, she said without preamble. Naomi looked at her. The easier version was the triumph, the version where you stand up there as the person who won and was right, and who the room eventually recognized. Maya put a hand briefly on Naomi's arm. The harder version was the question. Keep asking it, even when the asking is less satisfying than an answer would be. She moved on. Lorraine Voss stopped beside Naomi on her way to the exit. 30 years on the bench, she said. I've seen how discrimination cases end. Settlement. Press statement. 18 months later, nothing structural has changed, and the people who experienced with the original harm have moved on because they had no choice. She looked at the room, still generating its own conversations well past the program's end. This is different. It may not hold. But it's different, and knowing what different looks like when you see it, that matters. She left. Everett Marsh sat in the back of the room with his notebook closed on his knee. Been writing throughout the program, not a news piece, something he had been building page by careful page since November. Kind of work that did not rush, that did not choose the accessible angle over the true one. He would finish it in February. Would run in a magazines that still believed long-form work deserved long-form readers. He would not describe Naomi as a symbol or the Whitmore family as villains. He would write about a room and what a room becomes when the people inside it decide, imperfectly and together, to be honest about what they are looking at. The title he had written in his notebook the night of November, standing at the edge of a circle, watching a young woman kneel on a marble floor and pick up torn paper with both hands while 200 people filmed her. The quietest person in the room, he had known the titles since that night. Everything since had been the piece finding its way there. Put the notebook in his pocket, stood up, went to find his coat. Eleanor found Dora near the east corridor at 10:15. She had been moving through the room for 30 minutes, listening more than speaking, writing things down. She turned and Dora was there. Putting on her coat, Eleanor stopped, left space between them, did not close it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Asked me to be here when you said my name," Dora said. "So was." Eleanor nodded. "I want to ask you something real," she said. "Symbolic. Is there anything specific I can do that would actually mean something to you? Not to repair what happened. I know it doesn't work that way, but something concrete." Dora looked at her with the full, unhurried attention of someone who has spent a lifetime being looked past and has learned from that to look directly at things when she chooses to. "My daughter is 28, she said. Accounting degree. 2 years trying to break into financial services. 31 interviews. A pause. Excellent. I am not a biased observer. I am a mother who knows what competence looks like." Eleanor waited. "I'm not asking you to hire her because of me," Dora said. "I'm asking you to make sure the process that review application is actually the process you say it is now." 1. She held Eleanor's gaze. "That's the specific thing." "Send me his resume this week," Eleanor said. "Through the process, the one we've spent 8 months building, I'll ensure the people reviewing her are using those standards. The ones from before." A pause. "I can't guarantee an outcome, but I can guarantee the process is honest." Dora held that. Then all right. Not warmth, not absolution. Real, the response of someone who has heard a specific offer and been honest enough to accept. They stood in the corridor without filling it with words that would make the moment easier than it was. Then Dora said, "My daughter watched the stream from that night. Called me upset, the way you get upset when something confirms what you hoped wasn't quite that true." She looked at Eleanor steadily. Told her, "Don't judge by the one night. Watch what happens next." Eleanor was very still, and, she said, Dora looked through the archway into the main hall. At Beckett, still with Jerome. At Sloane, writing something down. At 300 people choosing to stay past the end of the thing they came for. "I'm here," she said. Not forgiveness. Presence, the decision to stay in the story rather than leave it. Or Eleanor was not going to name it or claim it or do anything except receive it carefully. "Thank you," she said. Dora put on her coat and walked toward the brass doors. Eleanor stood in the corridor holding the two torn halves of her letter, carried in her jacket pocket for 8 months, from the night she printed it until the moment she tore it at the podium. She folded them once and put them back, not to revisit. As a record, the distance between who she had been and where she was standing now. She went to find Graham. Naomi and August left at 10:30, arm in arm through the brass doors, the city immediate and cold around them. Uptown, the museum fell away through the window. Naomi put her hand in her pocket and found the invitation pieces. Held them in the dark without taking them out. 8 months of carrying them. Through the arguments and the sleepless nights and the 31st draft of a document still open on her laptop. Through the anonymous message taped to her desk, through the 11 accounts she had read and printed and kept. She would frame them eventually. Put them on her desk at the foundation, where people would ask, and she would tell the story and end it the same way every time. You cannot tear a person. You can only tear the paper, and the paper you can always put back together. But not yet. August's hand found hers swiftly in the dark. She held it. She thought about the woman in the anonymous message. Somewhere in this continuous city, going through her ordinary evening with no knowledge of what had happened on 5th Avenue tonight. No front row, no second chapter, just herself and her life and her name, which had always been whole, whether any room said it or not. Was the work, not the evenings with podiums and 300 people. Those mattered, but they were the beginning of the work, not the work itself. The work was the morning after, the honest process, the building toward the woman the room couldn't see. The city went on, so would she.